Hi, this is part 3 of our discussion on Chapter 12 on Public Relations and Advertising. We're going to focus on public relations for this last chunk, so here we go. First of all, we should discuss how public relations differs from advertising. They're lumped together in one chapter, but there really are quite substantial differences in the two. And you can see here in this little graphic example that there's a woman used, in a sexy pose with a bubble caption. Did I ever tell you how much I love advertising? Well, that's sort of an advertising approach to selling a product or service or some kind of thing. Public relations is much more concerned with trying to get factual information out to various types of constituencies, whether it's the media or other publics or an internal part of an organization. Here's a little more straightforward chart that will help you kind of know the difference between how they're done. People pay for advertising. In public relations, you're providing information and hoping that people will use it, and in particular the media will use it and provide publicity for your company or organization and whatever you're trying to get information out about. Advertising builds exposure. In other words, by repeatedly running advertising, by repeatedly getting your brand out there, by doing all those things we talked about in the first two sections, you are going to get make people more aware of your product or service or what you're all about. And public relations is all about trust building, about trying to build trust between an organization and the public or the media and the organization. In advertising, the audience is naturally skeptical of claims that advertisers might make. If it funnels through the media in public relations, that same information tends to give it some kind of third-party validation. In advertising, because you're paying for the content, whether it's a TV commercial or a radio commercial or a print ad or some other kind of ad on a website or something like that, you're guaranteed the content and placement because you're paying for it. When you're working as a public relations specialist, particularly in dealing with the media, there's no guarantee that your message is going to get published or get spread or dispensated. You must persuade the media to do that for you. Advertising, because you've bought the space or the time, you have complete creative control. In public relations work, you're providing information to the media. They ultimately control the final version of whatever your message is. In advertising, ads are mostly visual. Public relations uses languages, not so much visual images. Advertising is more expensive because you pay for it and you pay for all the creative approaches that come to coming up with an ad or a TV commercial. PR is less expensive. Advertising basically tells people buy this product or service. Public relations, particularly when it's filtered through the media, and if people have trust in the media, says this information that we're dispensing is important. So the basic difference is paid and unpaid, but you use some of the same technical approaches, some of the same selling approaches with public relations as you do with advertising. The chapter breaks public relations out into 4 models. The first one is it's called the traditional publicity model. And traditional, not in the sense that this is necessarily the most commonly used one now, although it's frequently used, but more of the P.T. Barnum method of PR as opposed to advertising. So in this kind of a traditional publicity model, public relations professionals try to get media coverage for a client, product, or event. Sometimes they have creative news conferences, they sponsor big flashy events, they have celebrity appearances show up, anything to attract the attention. It could be anything from a nightclub opening to providing tickets that they hope that the media will use to go cover their new cruise line and things like that. Public relations people are always trying to get the media to do things for them, but journalistic principles being what they are, often that fails. There are still a lot of mainstream journalists who don't take, in essence, what are bribes or offers from public relations people to cover their product or event. So this is still a publicity model that's used. It's used a lot in Hollywood. It's used a lot in anything involving politics. It's along the lines of the old P.T. Barnum effect. But I would say that 90% of the time this is not what the kind of public relations you're going to see around most towns in the United States. Most towns in the United States are going to use the public information model, which is the second one I'm talking about. This is simply where PR professionals simply want to release information to the public through the media. So they have, working on behalf of a client, they might issue a press release, they might create or produce consumer flyers, those things that are tucked into your electric bill. They provide a broad range of background information. In other words, do anything they can to facilitate news gathering. If there's going to be an event in Wichita, they will do everything they can to provide every bit of information the media knows, or wants to know, I should say, to cover that event. And for example, if it's a River Festival event, not only will the people doing PR for the River Festival provide the basic information for the media, but they'll also do things like provide a history of the River Festival. They'll provide media parking passes. They'll provide access to an event. They may even provide things like timelines and histories and chronologies, and put together sort of a media kit or a media packet that will let the media do its job. So this is actually the more common public relations model that's used day in and day out, particularly between journalists and public relations people. You know, journalists and public relations people kind of have a love-hate relationship. Journalists like to complain about PR people, but on the other hand, a good PR person can make the life of a journalist very, very easy by doing a good, straight, accurate job of providing information, helping the media and getting the information it needs, interviews, quotes, things like that. And so there's times when the two groups love each other, there's times when the two groups are paired off against each other, and I'll talk about that in a little bit here. The third model is what's called the two-way symmetric model. This is when PR professionals try to really get communication going with the public or the media through dialogue or talking about common goals and issues. This is often practiced in town hall meetings, other kinds of public forums, by government entities, and even by nonprofit groups. So in other words, in order to get problems solved, if a company or organization is trying to provide public relations to have people hear about an issue, talk about it, they will try to get people talking two ways, back and forth symmetrically, so each side has its say, or they might help moderate those kinds of discussions. The fourth way is the two-way asymmetric model, not symmetrical, say asymmetric model. And this is when PR people are simply trying to persuade a certain audience, a group of people, to adopt a certain behavior or point of view. Think of this as being more like being a propaganda effort on behalf of a company or organization. Government uses this a lot. This two-way asymmetric model was created by a very important advertising, mostly public relations guy named Edward Bernays, who's considered the father of modern PR. Back in World War II, they were trying to finance the war. He created a very successful public relations campaign that went alongside those advertising campaigns of World War I to get the public to buy war bonds in order to help finance the war. He also was very responsible for getting a lot of other groups, persuading a lot of other groups and members of the public organizations to do certain things. So he also provided a lot of sort of a scientific approach to persuasion and propaganda, and he wrote some of the earliest textbooks on public relations. This is just a really brief recap. If you go on from this class and actually take some public relations writing classes, you'll find out a lot more. But basically, public relations can be handled in-house at a certain company or organization, or it can be done by an outside agency which is paid to do some of these things. Some of the things they do is PR people handle media relations with the press. They provide press releases, they let them know about events, they provide them with all kinds of background information and help. They do both internal and external communications. Internal communications might include newsletters at companies, emails, or mass market emails to employees at a company. It might include news to investors and stockholders, annual reports, lots of different types of documents and ways of reaching the people who work within a medium or large size organization. External communications is basically the company to outside consumers. A good example of this is if you've ever been to a state fair, there are a lot of booths at state fairs where they're trying to market directly to farmers, for example, to buy farm machinery. At least I've seen a lot of that at the Kansas State Fair. I don't know if you've seen that at other places you've been to. So they're the PR people that work for a particular company, a particular tractor company, let's say, are providing first-hand information to potential customers, trying to convince them to buy that product. So that's another external type of client that they might have directly to consumers to try to convince them, particularly the niche audience of buyers, to consume that product or to take that company on as its brand. We don't have a lot of time to talk about crisis communication, but basically good PR agencies that are fully prepared in the event a crisis hits, whether it's an aircraft company that one of their aircraft goes down, they have a plan for what happens. Organizations like the Red Cross obviously have disaster plans for when stuff that's bad happens and they need to go into emergency mode. If a company becomes a target of the media for whatever reason, maybe the company has done something wrong or the media or public perceive the company has done something wrong, there have to be plans for dealing with that crisis. So crisis communication is an important function of most PR professionals. Strategic planning is another, and that is rather than just kind of taking things as they come, what is the company planning to do in the future, not only in terms of improving its business, but increasing its public relations effort with the public and the media. This is just a tip of the iceberg of a few of the things that public relations professionals do. One of the things that most people don't think about who go into PR or think about it is that what most public relations people do is a lot of writing. They've done studies, I know from my own research, that about 70% of the work for entry-level PR people is writing. Writing press releases, writing company histories, doing whatever you can, helping prepare crisis communication plans. So there's an awful lot of that. In PR, there's this perception, there's a lot of meet and greet and going to fancy parties and hanging around celebrities, and there's a certain amount of that. Particularly if you land yourself pretty high up the food chain and you may be doing PR for a company that has celebrity clients, or you may be the PR person for that celebrity. And that's a situation a lot of people aspire to. In the beginning, it's more likely that you're going to be doing a lot of writing and learning organizational skills and learning how to talk to various constituencies, whether they're internal, external, or the media, both in friendly ways and also in ways in which you have to protect your company or organization. Branding has been a term that's been around a long time, and we talked about it when we talked about advertising at the start of all these slides. But basically a definition for branding is using a combination of public relations efforts and advertising to make a product or a company brand stand out from the pack. So a good brand is simply that. It's recognizable. One of the things that we talk to communication students a lot about when they get a little bit deeper into our program is branding yourself. How do you want to be perceived by the world? And that includes not only just how do you write your resume, but how do you literally create visual imagery and set a tone for how your work and your career and yourself as a person are presented to possible employers in the outside world. So just as companies do branding, so should individual communicators. So some examples that I thought of, they're not in the book, but for many years, having an Apple computer was considered a status system, compared to a generic PC, personal computer. I don't know if that's true so much anymore. People that owned Apples like to flaunt the fact that it was a brand that was very well known for reliability, for not having bugs or problems. It also costs more for a long time than generic PCs. But PCs have kind of made a comeback in the last 10 years, and now there are some well-branded or well-known PC brands that can hold their own against Apple. Part of the reason that changed was that the software systems have become a lot more interchangeable than they used to be. But think about Honda and particularly Subaru and Volvo cars that are perceived as being very reliable or very safe, one of the two or both. So when you think about the commercials you see, that's the sort of things that are in the advertisements, and also that's the way that PR people for those companies brand those vehicles, is that yes, it may cost a little bit more for a Volvo, but it's got a great safety record. They stay on the road, they don't require as many repairs, and you're a lot less likely to die in one. Branding is also applied, as well as advertising, to luxury items like a Rolex watch versus a Swatch or just some cheap Timex or something like that. I know some people that are into expensive watches, and I thought watches were expensive, like a Rolex, but these are people that own or can, I don't know them very well, but they are part of groups of people that spend $10 or $12 million for a watch. And to me, that's just mind-blowing. I don't wear a watch, actually, but people do put a lot of emphasis on Rolexes, for example, or Philippe Patek, somebody correct me on that. Luxury items are almost always branded a certain way, differently. And you see a Cadillac or a Lincoln Town Car or a Rolex, the people in the commercials are always, well-dressed and live in mansions and drive at night and do mysterious things, and that's part of the advertising, but the PR side of that is keeping that image up by branding. And of course we have political branding. The most recent example is Donald Trump branding himself as a, quote, man of the people, which some people think that's true, that he understands, in his case, down-home Republicans. Other people say that it's impossible for a billionaire to consider himself a man of the people. So that it was just a political ruse to help get votes. So regardless of how you feel about that, Trump and his people were savvy enough to brand himself that way to a certain population that helped him get elected in the presidential election. So that's all I want to say about PR. There's a whole lot more we could do. There's not a whole lot more in the book that we could talk about. But I do encourage you, those of you who are going on to communication major, to make sure that you, when you take Com 301, for example, you'll get experience in writing in all these different areas, for newspapers, maybe magazines, certainly broadcast TV and radio, certainly some advertising writing, and some public relations writing. And so this course is just meant to give you kind of an overview of some of the things that PR, advertising, newspaper, and other people kind of do. I really appreciate you watching through all this. I hope it hasn't been too much of a struggle. Be sure to read the chapter. Be sure to watch these videos before our next test. And I am out of here. Talk to you later.